And the clock has struck 8.
Off we go.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Zoom chat about the fall of the House of Usher with composer Annelies Van Parys and librettist, this is going to test my Dutch pronunciation, Gaea Schoeters. It's odd to be meeting this way so long after the premiere when everything looked so very different in Berlin in 2018, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
But I'm thrilled that we do have an actual concrete occasion for our conversation about the production, a thing which is becoming depressingly rare in this age of lockdowns and restrictions. So it's really thrilling that the production is actually going to take place in Antwerp on the 27th of February. At 8 p.m. It's going to be live streamed, and it will be online for a whole 2 weeks after that. We probably will say this again in the course of the conversation just to make sure everyone gets the message. And you can get access to it for an online ticket of only €10. So that's an absolute bargain, cheaper than Uber Eats. Great way to have fun on your own or with your family. And really a wonderful relief, I think, for you guys who have really been through the mill in terms of this production. Perhaps you can tell me, Annelies, for a start, what has it taken to get to this point where there actually will be a production happening in Antwerp?
You mean COVID-wise?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just curious, like to start with the present, as it were.
Yeah. Well, actually, normally it would have been premiered last year in, I think, April, I think. But then, of course, that was the beginning of the first wave of COVID and lockdowns and everything, so that got cancelled. Then there was first rumors that it might be in autumn, but then of course that was very quickly, it became clear that that would not be the case. So then the next idea was, okay, the 27th of January was live performance was planned, and then the 7th of March in Ghent, 27th in Antwerp. And then quickly it became clear that also January would be way too early. So then it moved to online the 31st of January. But then you have all the quarantine regulations, so all the people who had to perform, they had to, well, lots of them come from abroad, and they of course had to respect these quarantine regulations. So then it became clear that the rehearsals could start only, well, way too late to make sure that that would be a good performance. So they decided again to plan again, and now the last thing that we have is now that it's going to happen finally the 27th of January. But I cross fingers because
I have to, sorry, I have to correct you there. I believe it's the 27th of February.
Did I say something different?
No, you said
January. Oh, I'm still, yeah. Or it was 27th of January, and then now it's 27th of February. So yeah,
it is a kind of Schrödinger's opera. It's there and it's not there, and it's performed and not performed, and dead and alive. But somehow it suits wonderfully well with the ghost story, I would say.
Yeah.
That is a fantastic analogy, Schrödinger's opera. I think you should actually put that as a subtitle of the piece now. Gaea, how has this whole Corona dance, if at all, changed the way that you view your piece?
Well, actually, when we wrote the piece, there was, of course, this underlying layer of what can fear and paranoia do to people, and how can that turn a completely normal society into a surveillance state. And at the time that we were writing it, the reflecting mirror that we had for that was sort of the development of the world in reaction to terrorism, and the way that there was this panic and these strict measurements and more camera surveillance, more ways of controlling people's whereabouts, and all these small liberties taken away. But as it is now, and that's really strange, it has in a way also this new echo of today's restrictions and the privacy and the freedom that we now give up out of fear for this pandemic. And that in the piece, actually, there is this doctor and all these parallel, all these small words that refer to medicine and to this epidemic idea and this epidemic of fear about which he talks. Yeah, that now, of course, it gets a really strange color.
Indeed. So it's more life catching up with art to that extent.
I'm afraid so, but if that's how it is, I'll write a terribly happy story for next year. We're thinking about comedy.
Good. I hope that the gods who control these things, or the chaos mechanisms, are listening into this. Annelies, would you do anything different if you did it again?
Actually, I don't know. I don't think so. Or
I mean, it is I suppose, as you say, in terms of how today's reality is echoed in the piece, it's a very claustrophobic work in general, isn't it?
Yeah, it already reflects very well. Actually, I think that nowadays it's even, for me, the work reflects even stronger what we wanted to tell. So, yeah.
Yeah, also the idea that everything happens in the entire piece is actually, it's a huis clos, but it's set within this house, and the house itself is a character, and it feels as a rather claustrophobic, narrow, very oppressive space, and the depression and the sadness of the characters who can't escape this closed unit in which they live is, I think, because of the quarantine. And what I feel with many people today, how they, after nearly a full year of being sort of locked up in their houses, the darkness that seeps in, and also all these conspiracy theories and people's minds going funny, and the anti-vax ideas, all of that is sort of in a way already, not in so many words, but in atmosphere in the piece, which is a strange thing to realize, actually, if you look back at it now.
It's certainly, if I think of an opera like Pelléas and Mélisande, what is so wonderful about it is all the things that are not said, all the spaces between the words, all the implications. And I wonder, was that one of the reasons why you chose Usher in the first place?
Well, I like that the idea of Usher. It's actually what I liked about it is that Debussy, in a way, and that you can tell from his letters, that he, with this piece, he wanted to escape a bit from this all too big inertia of this Pelléas et Mélisande. He wanted to make something that had more story, a bit more, action plot, in a way. So I found that very funny, because you see after even in the small part that is finished, because he only finished like 20 minutes, you already feel that he's back into some Pelléas et Mélisande feeling. So and I found that very striking, and I think that's the reason why he never finished it, because he sort of didn't manage to do what he intended to do, because he was about to write something different, and actually he was now more and more into a path of writing a second Pelléas et Mélisande.
Do you think he kind of painted himself into a corner?
I think already by choosing the story, maybe, because it's a rather unfortunate choice to take a Gothic novel, and especially a Gothic novel by Edgar Allan Poe, which is completely atmosphere based, and actually there is no plot at all if you want to write a plot driven story. And then you see him struggle, and you see him think, yeah, okay, but I'll move the perspective, because in the original Poe story, everything happens in one endless monologue intérieur in the head of Lamy, who observes these three other characters and just reflects on it. So he takes it away from that, and he gives all the characters a voice. Of course, a smaller voice to the woman, who can sort of sing 2 sentences and then dies. So for that, we had to think of a solution. But so you see him try, and then he thinks, and I want some tension, and I want something to happen. I'll install a villain. And he takes the character of the médecin, who in the Poe story, I think, just passes once on the stairs, mumbles something, and disappears through the back door and never comes into the story again. And he, in the first part that he writes in the libretto, already turns him into it's not that he's there so much, but he positions him very clearly as an active character with a drive and with a clear impact on the story. And I think at that point, he sort of thought, what have I done? And now what shall I do, and how shall I go on? And that's where you see that the 3 versions of the libretto that he wrote, that they actually start going in circles, because he's trying to make plot and action out of a story, which in a way is completely the opposite.
It sounds as if the work of looking at the source material was quite forensic in a way, or architectural, archaeological, I mean, sorry. Can you talk us a bit through the process of what you picked up, where you found it, and then how you decided what to keep and what to lose?
Well, actually, we first found some old scores. The only thing that actually exists of this score is a kind of vocal score. So it's just the voices with the piano, and there's not a real orchestration. There are some mentionings like viola or a cymbal, or there's some small words about instrumentation, but it's not orchestrated actually. So, but there have been several attempts of orchestrating this piece, or the snippets that are there, because a lot is not even coherent material. There's like gaps in between. And then I searched the need for the several attempts of reconstruction. The most complete one, who actually also made a longer Usher, is the one made by, and I'm not searching for his name. Well, it's on this CD. Robert Orlich. Orlich, who made a complete reconstruction. And then we started from, there's also a complete edition that has all the different versions and all the different sketches that have been made very nicely arranged, and that's also made by Robert Orlich. And that was like the basic idea where we started from. And then we started to see, what we were intending to keep. Actually, most of it. It's like 20 minutes of music in total. And then also what libretto was finished, and there was more libretto finished than was set on music. So, and then Gaea, of course, started to check what still was valid and what we could use and what not. And then, of course, the next thing to do is then make sure that the whole piece that had to become like 90 or 100 minutes of music, that of course it's not like 20 minutes of Debussy and then Van Parys. Yeah. So then we started to intercut a little bit and make sure that it was more balanced, that we had like snippets of Debussy even in the last act.
You have a cat problem.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last question, the last thing
I
you
refer
said.
to the cat problem, which just arises. So we take it aside and just ignore it fully. No, for the libretto, the instruction was rather clear. All text that is connected to music shall stay, and all text that is not connected to music shall stay as far as possible. So that's what I sort of had to begin with. And the problem we had, of course, is since Debussy was writing from the beginning to the end, we had the beginning actually had a rather large chunk of Debussy. And since he had started in this strange atmospherical style, the story was also moving terribly slow. Mm. So we were in this story, which was a bit top heavy, and we had to think of a way to at least cut a couple of slices in between so we could find a way to speed it up and then gradually speed it up towards the end, not to end with a Pelléas and Mélisande-like feeling, because you somehow had decided also that since Debussy's wish was to find action and plot, we would have to find action and plot. And on top, we already had this médecin villain. And since he was there, we had to find a way to fix it with him.
So it's really it's a dramaturgical challenge that you're starting with.
Sort of, because Debussy had already installed a rather big problem. Since there was now a villain there, it was also clear that somehow Roderick would consciously have to bury his own sister and yet love her. And we had to find a way out of this catch-22, which he had created, for which I think he never found an answer and therefore sort of gave up, like, who knows it, who doesn't know it, and what happens. And that's where we sort of started out. And then we do what we usually do. We have this big talk about, yeah, but what do you actually want with this? What is the theme that you want in? What do you want to install under this narrative as sort of a thematic story? And there it was quite quickly, it was clear that you wanted to talk about the dynamics of power and fear and paranoia as a tool for power. So this had to be an underlying layer. And another big problem we had was the language, because Debussy had started, of course, in the French that for him was natural French, but which to us sounded as rather archaic, or in any case, rather bombastic French, which we didn't want to carry through the whole opera. But since Annelies in the music never makes hard cuts, we also in the language didn't want any hard cuts. So we had to find a way to also let this gradually snow into a more modern language or into more modern ideas. And we looked like, which are the characters that already have lots of text in the beginning? And that's mostly Roderick, who has this ongoing endless lamento of misery, which just doesn't stop, and which is mostly in rhyme. So I spoke to the translator and I said, can we sort of keep that style for Roderick for the whole piece? And Debussy had borrowed largely from the Baudelaire translation of the Edgar Allan Poe story and turned that into some libretto form. So we looked for this quality of French. For Lamy, we looked for a much more rational, clean language. And then for the médecin, we decided to go all for Trump and other alt-right quotes and to translate them back into basic French, which gives some sort of rudimentary French. And there we all the time had to tell the translator, no, it's too beautiful, strip it down, strip it down. And in the contrast between these three textures, we could also find a way to make the story speed up and to make the language lighter towards the end. At least that was the plan.
Yeah.
Did you spend much time with the original Edgar Allan Poe in all of this?
Well, Yes, because one of the things that I found important to bring back to the story, which Debussy had decided to throw away, was that in Debussy's version, you start as Lamy comes into the house, which means that everything is inside the house and that the whole spherical setting, which is so typical of the God story with nature description and the description of the house itself, was sort of gone. And we wanted to find a way to bring it back, both for, first of all, a character reason, because we wanted to install the house itself as a fifth character in the piece. And so we had to introduce it the way you would introduce any character. But also because in this approach that Lamy makes towards the house, this gave us the possibility to start with a piece of music that Annelies could write, because otherwise it would just be like 20 minutes of Debussy and then the Van Parys and one cut in the middle. And by bringing this prologue and this approach on the outside back, that gave us musical possibilities, which were much more interesting in a way.
How did you, what were the forces governing how you decided for which instrumental forces you would write, and for that matter, how many singers you would have?
Yeah, of course, the four main characters, we just kept the same main character. So that's Lady Madeleine, the soprano, then her brother Roderick, then Médecin, and the Ami. So, and those three are baritones for Debussy. So we kept them as baritones, and three baritones and one soprano. And then for the instrumentation, well, yeah, of course, it was like a limited number of instruments that was allowed, and I'm not sure if it's 13 or 14. Well, it's a small effective, and well, my first idea was to stay close to a Debussy orchestra or ensemble. Because I did already lots of arrangements, like for example, Période Maison, I've made a chamber music arrangement. So my first idea was to go to this kind of orchestration, but then I realized that it was already very difficult to have all this material by Debussy and to get away from it, because it's very dominant in a way. If you have material from another composer, you of course need to use it, you need to use it wisely, and you need to work on that material. But if you then also in the orchestration take instruments that Debussy himself would have chosen, then it becomes very dangerous that you start writing a kind of pseudo Debussy. So then I decided not to go for this more traditional wood and string ensemble.
No, you said brass, and regretted it for months.
Yes. I thought, well, I changed the woods for brass. So a nice little trumpet, a horn, a tuba, a trombone, a very nice quartet. And then also I added the accordion, and then in the end also a flute to have at least a bit of woodwind. And then the percussion and the string quintet. But that brass, that was really giving me a headache, because of course, balance-wise, it's really, you have to watch every step you take. So it's really very difficult to find the right ways to balance. But in the end, I was very happy to have chosen it, but still it was. Well, I could have made my life a bit more easy by taking a bit other instruments. But anyhow, that's how I.
In the end, that's part of the originality of I think that struck me very much as a listener. The extent to which you managed to respect Debussy's material and keep your own voice in the process. That's obviously also got to do with your performing forces, and I felt that you certainly had a conductor who was on your side with the production there. That was you need that kind of harmony in the realization as well as in the creation. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about the process of the first performances. what the main challenges were there, and what pleased you the most?
Well, yes, of course, since you tell about the conductor Marit Strindlund, who's also going to conduct here in Belgium, it's really amazing to work with her. I worked with her before, also for example, for this Pelléas et Mélisande arrangement. She was also conducting this. And she's like, since she discovered my music, she's a big advocate of everything that I'm writing to. So that's really nice to have someone who loves your work and who does everything what she can to make it sound exactly as you wish. So yeah, the thing is with her, it's also very nice. We can have very nice conversations. So the first thing I do is I send a score, then she starts reading it, and then she has lots of questions about details. What do you intend? Which sound are you after? And then in the first rehearsals, she really has a very open ear. It's really, she's listening and telling, yeah, is this exact sound what you want? And then sometimes she also gives some input, but are you sure it's not, is it not this or that? And I like this, if people question what you're after, because then you have to rethink sometimes. And sometimes it's just to confirm that indeed it is what you are after. But it's good if people make you aware of the fact that it's not just a choice, but that you have to be aware of that choice that you're making. So, and she's just very good with the singers also. That's also something I like a lot, because not every conductor, of course, is gifted to work with singers. That's also a very specific way of working. And she managed also to find what one of the qualities is, and that I like a lot in rehearsals, is that she also managed to, she's good in time management. So it's really, you feel it's going on, but if there's a real problem, she really works on it. If there's a difficult passage, she really sorts out the problem, but she's not sticking there for 1 hour until everyone thinks blah Van Parys. So it's really nice that she's going on. Then after a while, she even also with people, she's so nice. There was one guy who had real trouble with a solo, and then she really she felt that it was too much to ask each time, and then she just left and went on, and then just passed by this place again, but accidentally, and then he played already a lot better. So it's also the very human way of working, and I think I like that a lot.
There's a lot of psychology in making things work in an opera production, isn't there?
It's one of the main things. It's you must be not only a very good musician, but also a very good psychologist, because there's all kinds of, there's also a lot of tension, of course. So you have the singers, they want to sing and to spare their voices a little bit, and then you have then it has to be on scene, and they have to do it by heart, but then they are lost in space, and then someone has to catch them and make them at ease. So, and I think she's really good at that, and still preserving enough time to work in depth on musical aspects. So and always also after every rehearsal there is time to talk and to say this and this I didn't like, I would like to correct a little bit, or she's always open for any suggestions. So that's really nice to work with her.
Yeah, what in a way also struck me with this is we had two completely different casts, because there was the Berlin cast who did it all in French, and then there was the Swedish cast who did it all in Swedish. And they're completely different singers, which in a way also turns it into a different opera. There is just different tensions, different relations on the stage. And I think for a conductor, it's a big challenge to, again, rebalance that with what does the ensemble do? What do the singers do? What are we telling here? Which atmosphere is it? And you could just try to do a copy paste and stuff new singers into these roles which were already in your head, but she just in a way starts from zero and builds the piece again. And that I find really interesting, because that gives the singers also the option to stand in their strengths.
Yeah, and you also realize then, because in Sweden she was working with a specialized ensemble for contemporary music, and then she went much further in some aspects. So in some contemporary techniques that I was asking for that were okay in Berlin, that were perfect for me. But then she realized, oh, but here we can go further. And then she really pushed them and to go to their limits. And it was really, for me, was surprising how different the piece could even sound. So that's also nice.
Have you been able to attend any of the rehearsals here in Antwerp?
Not yet.
So a whole new level of layers potentially.
Yeah.
I realized that I jumped a bit ahead of myself because last time we visited Madeleine, she only had 3 words and then died. And I wonder if you would like to, a spoiler alert here, if you want to, tell us how you resuscitated her, as it were, for the story.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we should tell a little bit about the story yeah, maybe you just tell about Madeleine and the story.
I can. The problem with the story is, what it actually is about, if I tell it in 3 lines, is there is Roderick who sits at home with a depression and worries terribly about his sister who is ill and the medicine who's taking care of her. And his friend Lamy, he sent him a letter and says, I need your help, you have to come. The friend arrives, turns out Roderick has this big paranoia-like depression. And then very early in the story, his worst fear becomes true and Madeleine does die, I think already in Act 1. Which is, of course, if you want to give the soprano something to sing, not what I would call an ideal situation. But luckily, we're in a ghost story, so we don't really need her alive to let her sing. And so we let her sing on a bit. And then I think at the end of Act 2, she's being buried in the vault. And there we just give her a large, I think, yeah, there we give her a first large solo part where she can just, being dead and undead, because now I spoil it completely, actually she isn't dead at all, but they bury her alive, can sing on until somewhere in the middle of Act 3 she really dies in the vault and is dead. But still that's not a problem, because afterwards she can still come back, since we're in a ghost story, as a ghost this time, and do a duet with her brother. So we actually found all kinds of ways to start with the living one, then the maybe dead one, then the she's not dead but still alive, but now she's dying, which is lots of singing, and then she has died but now she's a ghost and in her brother's mind, so why not let her sing a bit? And it also made her, and that's of course why we wanted to do it, psychologically more interesting, because we wanted to play with this strange relation which there is between brother and sister. And Debussy had installed something of a strange incestuous love tension there, which we could not avoid because it was clearly positioned in Act 1, so there was no way around it.
Do you think that was not there in the Poe?
It's not there in the Poe in the same extent. In the Poe, it's much more vague and you can think it's there, but it's definitely not outspoken, whereas it's actually the médecin who already in Debussy's first version points the finger to it and says that's not a healthy relationship between the two of them. And then Debussy also installs, which was another difficult thing, we had to work with some strange amorous thing between the médecin and Madeleine in Act 1, which we also had to carry through the story. And if they all love her, why do they then kill her and bury her alive? So that complicated things a bit. But what we wanted to do mostly was, you have this tension between Roderick, who with his fear is actually smothering his sister, and Madeleine, who represents freedom and this wanting to escape the darkness, which he cannot escape. And with that, we play along in the whole story, actually.
She's kind of Schrödinger's soprano.
Yes, it's an ongoing theme in the opera. I think we should really put it as a subtitle.
3 baritones, is that a dream or a nightmare for you as a composer?
Yeah, actually it was more of a, well, it's not a nightmare, but it's not easy because you want to differentiate a little bit. So I tried to make 3 types of musics as much as possible in order to have also in my mind a kind of differentiation between the 3 baritone voices. So and then I get one a bit lighter, and then Roderick definitely is the most dark one, and is always having also an area of fear. So he's always in these very long, almost romantic atmosphere, whereas Lamy is very often accompanied by the vibraphone and harp, and is much more funny. His interventions are always, well, clumsy. So he tries to do something to help his friend, and he tells some things, but he always ends up saying something that is not really helpful in a way. So it's bonhomme maladroit. That's a bit his way of speaking. And then of course Médecin, I also give a complete different timbre, a different color in making him the most always very harsh. You feel when he's singing that there's something not right. So it's like 3 different characters, and I try to make them as far apart as possible, also giving them different instruments. Like Roderick is always accompanied by the tuba, the lowest warm instrument. Then Médecin very often with the trombone, with a wah wah, so and also the nasal sounds. And yeah, as I told Ami, then with percussion and harp. So it's yeah.
I want to return to a part of my earlier question, which is what brought you the most joy in the first production run?
I think what gives most joy for me always is the first time that all the instruments come together. Even before the singers. I'm so sorry for the singers. I also love it when they are there, but it's the first time that all instruments blend together, and that some colors that you imagined, that they all of a sudden they work. And it's not like you combine 2 sounds, you have like 2 sounds and then there's something there. And that's, for me, that's the magic. And that's most of the time, that's the first rehearsal for the first time when things start to work. And then that's, for me, that's sheer magic. And then of course everything else is bonus, but that's for me the most
Was the Stockholm run very different for you from the Berlin run? And do you expect the Antwerp run to be accordingly very different or not?
Well, one of the first things that made the Stockholm run absolutely different is that it's in Swedish. And
right.
We were a bit preoccupied with how that would sound, because it's very strange once the music and the sound of it is in your ears that you will then hear it in a different language. But somehow it landed wonderfully, because we have all these Swedish Queens here, and we were directly in this murder atmosphere as soon as the Swedish came along. And actually, I think they did a wonderful translation with setting it to music. I mean, it really worked very well.
Yeah, it was very musical.
Yeah.
And
also another big difference is it was a completely different hall, because in Berlin, of course, it was performed in sort of a room with ceiling and a rather small audience, but the audience nearly part of the stage, everything, a sort of stage on stage feeling. Whereas in Stockholm, folk opera is just a huge theater with the stage in front and then everything around it. So also for the choir parts which come in, because there's choir parts which we added. The choir parts were, in our mind from the beginning, intended as a surround, which sort of were in and around and behind the audience. And that gives a completely different feeling. Schrodinger's choir, they're there and not there. And sometimes they're one thing and sometimes they're another. You never really know. But so that was also a completely different effect in both rooms, who were really different.
And what are your expectations or what are you expecting from the Antwerp production, from the Antwerp Rum? Well, I know we have half the cast is new, right?
Yeah.
That's a difference.
I'm very curious. What this time, because it's always different chemistry with people on stage. And we already 2 times had casts that were about the same age, like but rather young in Berlin, then a bit older in Stockholm, but they all knew each other very well. And then now it's again completely different.
Yeah, it's one from the Berlin cast, one from the Stockholm cast, and 2 new ones.
So it's a bit
no idea what will happen there.
So it will be very surprising, that for sure. But I think also the musicians here of the Flemish Opera, they are very good, very skilled musicians. So I'm looking forward very much, I must say, to hear what they will make of it. And I'm sure also because Marit has now these 2 experiences, that she might discover even new things again. And it's always interesting to see a conductor that already conducted your work conducted on a different ensemble, because they tend to take their experience of the former time, and I always have the impression that it goes faster the second time, as if they already know what are going to be the most difficult parts, which parts they should study first, and how they should coordinate to make sure that everything is fine. And I think that's logic. They also have to work their way through the work.
The world has changed immensely since your opera was born in ways that we absolutely could not have imagined at the time. For those of us who for our listeners who've joined a little bit later, earlier on in the conversation, Annelies and Gaea mentioned the fact that, in fact, the core of their idea, that idea of surveillance and paranoia for the opera, holds the test of time very well indeed, with the pandemic that has overtaken us. But still, I wanted to ask you, what's it been like for both of you to not have access to live music in the same way?
It's a disaster.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the harshest things of this entire COVID quarantine thing. And I think I realized it early on in the first lockdown, because we had a really strict lockdown in spring here in Belgium. And 1 month in, I think, there was suddenly this ensemble who sang, I think, Monteverdi with mouth masks on Facebook. And the moment that I saw it, I sort of realized how much I had missed this, especially vocal music, coming in even on a screen. And that triggered the idea of the concerts on funeral sites that we did this summer with singers and pianos. And there I remember the moment of the very first performance with Laure Binon on the cemetery here in Ghent. And she started to sing. And on the first 2 or 3 notes that she was singing, it was in a way, it was a magical moment, because that was the first live vocal music in 6 months that happened. And on top, it was a fantastic piece.
Yeah.
So it touched me enormously.
Yeah.
And I think not only that, but also the fact that there are these bigger productions like opera are not there. I find it terrible, because we all work like mad to find alternatives and solutions. And it's fantastic that we do that. But at a certain point, you just want to have this complete opera, and the voices and the atmosphere and the red plush and the staging, and that I nearly miss Wagner.
Annelies, do you miss Wagner yet?
She had one in between.
I was a little bit fortunate that in when was it, September, I was again at Volkopen, because I made an arrangement of Wagner, Tristan and Isolde.
Oh, wow.
They were rehearsing it. So even if I had to sneak away before the premiere, I still had some rehearsals. But I must say, I was so happy to be there and to have live music. I miss that so terribly much. And also on the same occasion of these concerts on the cemetery there, I think it's been years since I've been crying because of a piece of music or because of someone singing. But I was so like, live music. It did something I didn't know that could still be the case, because if you're a professional musician, and after a few years, I stopped crying for every beautiful moment, or you cry less. But then I was really taken away, blown away by Lore. It was such a magical moment, and then I realized how important live music is. That's I'm really longing, craving for live again, but we still have to wait a lot.
At least for this production, your musicians are able to come together and make music. That's something of which we've also been deprived, and
this joy.
One would absolutely right one to be able to see the rehearsals.
Yes, it's been interesting seeing how the different countries have responded to the restrictions in terms of how they have or have not looked after their artists during lockdown. And I think each society has shown the degree to which they do or do not value performing arts. And a lot of that has been really distressing and alarming and depressing. I wanted to ask you both here and now, and related to this production, why do we need opera?
It's larger than life.
I somehow, with that question, I'm tempted to always quote Julian Barnes, who never liked opera. It was always a genre that he couldn't live with. He found it too big, he found it a bit of nonsense, and no one sings in real life, and why should I listen to a story where people for 3 hours sing about the fact that they love someone else and then die? And then at a certain point, his wife got ill and died. And at that point, he realized that opera was in a way the only thing that was big enough to get him through this mourning and to get him through this crisis. And that precisely by being indeed larger than life and larger in emotion and larger than anything, it could be a relief, and it could somehow be a way out for these feelings with which in realistic terms he couldn't come to terms. So I think, especially in a time like this, when reality is so grotesquely out of proportion, opera is the only thing which can sort of still captivate.
Thank you for that extraordinary answer. That touches me also. I must say, in these times, I've thought again and again about Ruth Berghaus and her definition of opera as der singende Mensch auf die Bühne, the singing person on the stage. And that, for me, has been a kind of semi-articulated or inarticulable explanation for the real. You know, we want to be really in the room as the real person singing now. It's that physical proximity, that this miracle of togetherness that happens in opera. How important is an audience to a work?
Extremely important.
Extremely. And I think especially also for the performance.
Yeah, also for the performance.
I mean, I've been having the fortunate and unfortunate experience of performing for empty halls these days. And it's already a very strange thing to talk to a camera in an empty theater hall, but we have singers there. And for a singer who stands next to a piano and actually sings into this empty room, which was in that case even filled with kuscheltiere, so these little plush animals.
Oh, really? Who did that?
They did it in Antwerp in the Arenberg, just to give you the feeling that you can address the crocodile on row 1 if you want. But the thing is, nothing comes back. And the whole thing, especially with vocal music, I think the magic is that a sound comes out of a human body without any technical assistance and reaches an ear and enters another human body. And that makes a connection. It's in a way to jump to a completely different genre. It's what Kate Tempest would call connection. And where she says that what I do on a stage and why I want to perform my poetry in this hip hop slam form is because I want this connection not only between me and my audience, but also between all these different people in the audience who are at the same point listening to the same thing, and in this togetherness connecting to one another in a singular emotion.
Yeah.
And that's just something we can all sit here and watch our screens all night, but we're still in a way alone with what comes in. And this feeling of a shared experience
that's very strong.
That's also why one opera in one audience just sounds completely different than the same opera the next night with a different audience.
Yeah, and one of the most beautiful things I think that exists in music is the moment, the shared silence. If you have a full concert hall and then all of a sudden there is a full silence, that's such a different silence from an empty hall.
There's a tension in the silence, or you have a piece and the piece ends, and then there is this tiny moment between the last note and the applause. Is it 1 second? Is it 3? Is it 15? Or is it a scary 28? And does that then mean they loved it or they hated it?
Or they didn't understand that it's finished yet?
Yeah, precisely. So it's all these things. And it's in these small reactions, I think, that a piece really comes to life.
Yeah.
I mean, you can play for a rehearsal or for an empty hall, but even the best rehearsal is a completely different piece of music than a live performance where there is a real tension, especially with vocal things, I think.
Yeah.
The Vienna Philharmonic did at one point a study together with the Medical University in Vienna, where they hooked performers and audience members up to an EKG, to a heartbeat measuring device. And they found that in the course of the performance, the heartbeats of the audience and the orchestra synchronized.
Really?
Really?
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and for me, that's kind of like a proof of something we already know.
Yeah,
we do feel it, but it's wonderful to see it scientifically demonstrated.
I can perfectly well imagine it.
Yeah, me too.
How it works.
Yeah.
All of these things said, though, I don't want us to be dissing the forthcoming live stream, which is a small miracle in itself. So I wanted to ask you, how important is the audience of the live stream to you, and how important is the live stream itself?
Well, I think since nowadays that is the only thing we have, it's very important to have this audience, and it's a new kind of audience. It's for us getting used to this different ways of being live streamed. But the advantage is, of course, that you automatically have good recordings, good material, and that's also an interesting thing that you can more easily share some performances. So that's the advantage, that people don't have to come to travel half the world to see your work, but they can just sit at their screen and watch it. So that's a huge advantage, because if not, if you're presented in Flanders, then maybe you come from Berlin, I don't know, but there will not be people coming from the States to have to watch Usher, I think. So, and that's now everyone can watch all over the world. So that's nice, of course.
Another thing also, I think certain performances are better fit for live streams than others. And I think there with Usher, somehow we're lucky, because in the way that the staging is made, and also in the way that the singers handle it and that they play with it, and also because the ensemble is on stage, or at least normally they are, you have this luxury in such a live stream that you can also see where the music comes from. And for contemporary music, for an audience, it's always fascinating if they are able to really see the ensemble. And there, I think that what you lose in tension, you can win in detail. That's, I mean, it doesn't solve everything, but at least you get something back. You just have to, I think, accept that it becomes something else.
Yeah.
It's a different experience of a different art form. And it won't feel like an opera in the opera, but it's not only minus, there is also a plus coming in. And another thing about the live streams, and that's, I think, really vital, is that the people who play it, the musicians, the singers, that at least they play. Because there's so many musicians, so many singers, and so many other artists. And I think that's something that is brutally completely underestimated by politicians, that are in a complete state of depression, not only for financial reasons, but because we live to create, we live to make music, we live to perform, to communicate, to connect, and paid or unpaid, if we sit at home for 6 months and nothing of this creativity can go out, it's a dreadful thing. And okay, even if it's a live stream, at least there is something flowing again. And on top of that, something else we forget, it's like professional sporters. If they don't play, if they don't perform, if they don't sing, if they don't touch their instrument in this, and of course they can rehearse at home, but that's different. There's a different tension, there's a different precision, there's a different stress on it. If they don't do that for a year or a year and a half, or God knows how long we'll all be locked up, there is so much professionality that's lost. The singers are top sport people with a short career.
Yeah.
And that's what we always forget.
Yes. Do you think that we will see some kind of return to normal within the foreseeable future, or is there can you foresee what kind of stamp this will leave on the genre?
Well, for big opera, I think for having a large opera performed, I'm not sure whether the first few years will be so easily back. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's for sure. It's a great opportunity and revival for chamber settings of opera. Everyone has been ordering arrangements, reductions, small versions.
So our larger than life can survive by being smaller, perhaps.
No.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the logic now. But as we seem to have some sort of predictive thing in the things that we make together, we are thinking about a comical opera with good ending and an enormous orchestra, something like a double symphonic or something.
Well, please do it, because since you do seem to have some kind of control there, it would be nice to predict a productive future for the art form. I must say, great that you wrote a chamber opera. And indeed, as we've said earlier, many of the themes we're dealing with now are already foreseen in this piece. Just for those who've joined late, this will be live streamed on the 27th of February at 8 p.m. And it will stay online for 2 weeks, and you can buy yourself a virtual ticket for only €10, cheaper than Uber Eats, and more fun than Netflix. And it's really real. So I wonder if there's anything else both of you would like to say about the forthcoming premiere before we open the floor to comments and questions.
It would be nice to add that we have another invisible opera approaching, because the first opera we made together, Private View, will also be live streamed.
Yeah.
I missed that acoustically. Can you say that again slowly for us?
Yes. So the first opera that we actually made together, Private View, will also be presented, live streamed. And I'm not sure.
I have no idea.
I think the 10th of February, but I should check my agenda.
That's quite soon. So watch this space for Private View.
That's with the International Opera Academy. So that's young singers that are studying now very hard to have all these. And it's again with Tom Creed, who did also the stage direction of the first version of Private View. So we're very happy to have him again for this youngsters production. And the Spectra Ensemble and Philippe Laté are doing the music. So I'm thrilled and I'm really looking forward. I already heard some rehearsals and I hope to visit some of these rehearsals soon live. And then, in the beginning of February, so the 10th of February, if I'm not mistaken, there is the premiere live streamed.
Another minor miracle in these days of restrictions.
Yeah. Yep.
So obviously the Flemish are getting it together. Fantastic. Do we have questions?
Well, since it's a mainly Flemish audience, I don't see any question yet, but I would like to do a warm call. Like, please, since we now have something to talk about, give us a question. You can just type it into the chat in any language which we could probably understand.
Or you can also
unmute yourself and ask it in person if you prefer that.
I love these awkward silences at these moments.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I would encourage people to make their voices heard now, because that's half the point of being together. Let's hear you.
There could be we have a real unreal audience.
Yes, it's a Schrödinger's Zoom.
Yeah. Everything you always wanted to know about the composer.
Well, if not, I'll ask you one.
Oh.
Since someone has to start. With Private View, you did something with Hitchcock. With Usher, you did something with Edgar Allan Poe. What is this dark side of your personality? And will it go on to darker things, or are you planning to turn light?
Yeah, that's indeed strange. So a lot of people think also that I have something with horror stories, but I cannot watch 1 minute of a horror story. So it's a strange side, and I don't understand actually. Maybe it's by creating an opera around it that I'm coping with this darkest side. I don't know. Good question.
Since your next work is going to be a large comedy, it's obviously time to turn away.
But are you diving into this card?
I can also show you the handwritten scores, because I'm one of those composers who still do everything by handwriting.
Wow. So, do you also use Sibelius in Finale, or do you hand that over to someone else?
That's the worst thing. Then after writing everything on paper, then I'm also inputting it on Sibelius. And they already told me that I should take a slave for that. But since I don't trust anyone except myself for inputting notes, I cannot, I'm still not able to let anyone else do it.
So you don't sleep very much?
No.
That's also where it becomes interesting, because I hand in a nicely printed libretto, which Annelies then handwrites into the handwritten score and later types into the Sibelius version, and then I get it back. And I start to wonder where all the other halves of my sentences went. And it's always, with everything we do together, the big mystery is what has disappeared and how vital was it to the story?
Yeah, it's very often that's a Schrödinger's text.
That obviously still a relationship where you need an awful lot of trust between librettist and composer, and it's certainly something that really works in this opera, and that so often doesn't work in new operas. I don't know why. Is it because there just aren't very many good librettists, or is it because the art of libretto writing is underrated?
Maybe, but I actually think that the bigger problem is a structural problem in the organization of the process. And I think that largely has to do with, there is not a real fixed process for how a libretto writer and a composer should work together these days. And there also, in the past, there wasn't always a clear idea. I mean, some composers do everything themselves. Some are better with it, most are worse with it. Some just sort of shop in text that already exists. Some are really good with that. There's adaptations of existing texts, but very often it's sort of a linear process. Like there's maybe one conversation about the idea, then the libretto writer produces this text, hands it over to the composer, and then the composer starts to usually cut lots of text because there's always too much, and with the rest does what he or she wants. And from the beginning of our cooperation, actually, we questioned that process, and we thought, like, is there no better way that we can do this? And what we usually do, and now I'll come up with the next strange piece of paper, is we have this discussion about what shall we tell? And then I usually ask Annelies, what's your musical ideas? How do you want it to sound? How do you imagine the architecture of the piece? What's fast, what's slow? How much text do you want for a certain part? And sometimes I come with strange ideas. Like, for example, with Usher, at a certain point, I came to Annelies and I said, yeah, look, I know that the Debussy intended it to be fully true composed, but I would like arias. Can I get some real arias? And Annelies said, no, you most certainly you cannot. And then 2 days later, she came out of the study and said, okay, you can have 5 in a duet, and then I won't have any more nonsense. And no, you can't have da capo.
But I did write
and gave me 1 in the end. But so there is this back and forth going. And then I take the story and I sort of make, and I'll try to get this in front of the camera. I make something which is a graphic storyboard of each of the acts with the scenes and where they play and where which themes of the story come back and how it's sort of all organized. And then out of that, Annelies starts to build a musical structure. And there's also undoubtedly a very beautiful drawing of that.
I'm not sure.
She looked. And then we start to, there it is.
Yeah, that's just one.
The beginning.
No, yeah, that's just one of my many structure sketches.
Annelies, can you show it a bit closer to the camera, please?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if this is the most. That's the Rodrigo's Mad sketch. So.
That's fascinating.
And what we then sort of do is we break it up in little scenes. And of every scene, we then have this conversation again, like, what do you imagine musically? What's the tone? What's the color? What's the speed? And above all, how much text do you want? Because if Annelies imagines something there for which she needs 6 words and I give her 26, that's where most librettists and composers, I think, get into trouble. And we just sort of discuss it. And Annelies then reads me the score, which is also, for me, that's the most beautiful moment of every process. She writes, and at the end of every writing day, I ask, what have you written today? And then I get this huge sign language hand dance in which she starts to explain me what it will sound like when it's finished. And then based on that, I get an idea of the atmosphere and try to bring that back to the text. But so it's a continuous back and forth process where we really go through the whole thing together. And I think that is a luxury that very few composers have.
Yeah,
because they just get a finished text and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think in a way you're also telling us there just aren't any shortcuts.
Not really, I think. And I think in an ideal world, and that's where the next problem comes in, it would be even better if from the beginning also the director would be there, so that the staging also already becomes part of the whole idea of the thing. Because in the end, you have to end up with this interdisciplinary form where these 3 art forms complement each other and you don't steal each other's bites. And we have to leave room for the staging to tell part of the story, but it would work best, I think, if you organically in 3 could make the thing. And with Tom for Private View, we had that luxury because that Tom was there already from the beginning. He was there before I was there. And
I mean, I've often felt that it's a mistake when the librettist is also the stage director, although we see that very often. Sometimes I feel you do want an element of remove from your work so that we get someone who mediates for us in a sense.
I also think that this external eye is very important, that someone from the outside looks at it again and then interprets it and puts it on a different scale, and that we all stay in our artistic strength. But I think it's a really interesting outset if you in the beginning, or at least as a team complete, and then go through the process. And the reason that is, I think, usually not done is that when it comes down to repertoire, there is no living composers and no living librettists that you have to look after. You just take the piece, but the piece also already exists. It has been created, and you can do adaptations and readings and change it or use it in a different way. But if it's the first time that a new piece has to be created and brought into the world, I think ideally you're together from the beginning.
We do have a question here from Lada about when we might be able to see the next live performance of this piece. Of course, online, just to say again, 27th of February, 8 p.m. The piece will stay online for 2 weeks, and you can buy a ticket for only €10. But in terms of when it might be possible to physically attend a performance?
This one, I don't think so. No, it was planned in March, but I don't think in March there will be still no performances. So I think
you had a co-production partner in Nanterre. What happened with that?
Actually, I don't know, but I think that the idea was not, they were like co-producing, but not inviting the production. Okay. Because they're like a normal theater for plays, but not really for opera, or it's I think
so. It's a moment. It's Schrodinger's live production, but I would add to this conversation that I imagine this team is open to offers. So if Always. You would like to see a live production of The Fall of the House of Usher, let them know about it.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah. You're welcome. Okay.
Right. Well, it's been lovely having all of you with us.
Yeah.
I do hope everyone will join together to watch the live stream, and there will be an opportunity to revisit this conversation because it's being recorded. And I hope people won't miss the opportunity because we have so little to look forward to in the opera world in these dark days. It's always so much more interesting to see a piece that you haven't seen a million times. And
so, late question.
Looking forward to seeing that. Yes. We have the question about how it was to work with the sound sensitivity topic. I'm not sure I understand the question.
What precisely do you mean by the sound sensitivity? Do you mean for the live stream, or do you mean in general in the creation of the opera? Now we're waiting for a typed answer. Of the characters. As in to give them each their own.
Or is it about the main character, his in the original story?
The sound sensitivity of the characters. I'm still not sure that I understand the question.
Neither do I.
We did, I'm not sure if the questioner joined us late, but Annelies has already talked about the way that she worked with the 3 baritone voices by orchestrating different colours for each of the 3 singers. And we've also discussed the way that we haven't actually talked about how you set the soprano part, which is kind of a counterbalance to the baritones, isn't it? The darker the men, the lighter the female voice.
Yeah, she's indeed singing very high and very. Also, the moment she's suffocating, it's also in very short phrases and very extremely high, as she's literally suffocating.
Quite ethereal as well, though. Sort of otherworldly. It's quite ethereal. It's quite otherworldly. The writing for her.
But the whole Madeleine character, and that's already like that in the original story, and Debussy gets it even further, is a bit transparent, and it's hard from the beginning to grasp if she is. Actually, the first time you see her, you wonder if she's not a ghost.
Yes.
Which is before she even ever potentially could die and become one. But there is always this unrealness about her. And also in the text, she's introduced by Debussy with singing this song that she has, which is a very strange song about a medieval castle and the lost kingdom, and also very unworldly. So there is something about this whole Madeline character which is very hard to grasp, as if she's more Roderick's fantasy than a reality. And that in a way we tried to keep, but at the same time we thought, if we only have one woman in this opera, we have to give her a bit of power. And the real power and the real strength have to lay within this female character, which is in a way difficult if she has to die. But since she sort of then is apparently the only one who understands what's going on and who sort of has this ability to forgive and to...
Forgiveness is important.
Her forgiveness and her understanding of what her brother does to her and why he does it makes her in a way a very powerful character. So playing with this contrast was also, I think for us, an interesting thing to do with a female character who is in the original story terribly limited.
Has that answered the question?
Yeah.
Great. It does occur to me at this late stage that I forgot to ask you the classic question about what it's like being women in a male-dominated world, to which, of course, the answer is usually, I don't know, I've never not been a woman. I just... well, there are ways. But I wonder, has anything shifted in the pandemic in terms of the way the arts world or the broader world weights who has power and who doesn't have power, who should get opportunities and who doesn't? Has anything changed for better or for worse in that sense?
During the pandemic?
I think that what the pandemic did change is that the classical structures have somehow been complemented by this. There is this, I mean, the whole thing is, of course, a disaster for the cultural landscape, but there is, as there is in every disaster, also this sort of strange opening for opportunity in which things become possible, which normally aren't. And in this, I tend to call it the cowboy space. It's like unknown territory and you can occupy it. And there is this new gold rush for creative artists who are also good entrepreneurs and who are very fast at responding to this new reality to claim a piece of land which formerly wasn't there. And I see very interesting artistic experiments take place in this new land which is there. And of course, the positive result of it could be that part of these new things could find their way into the normal landscape when things go normal again. On the other hand, it could also be that it then just the window closes again and everything goes fully back to normal. So let's just hope that a couple of these good things find their way into the new reality.
Would be nice. We have one more question, I see. If whether Annelies, you could be more specific about where there's Annelies and where there's Debussy. I like the fact that the question should be asked, and I think in itself that's a comment on the nature of the piece, that you are so deftly weave your way between your world and his. But I'll let you answer.
Well, actually, the thing is, even Marit, who conducted it quite a few times by now, she tells me that she still cannot figure out exactly where Debussy stops and my music starts, and so she's still sometimes confused. She thinks, "Oh, this is Debussy. Oh no, this is Van Parys." So it's and of course, in general, as we talked before, it's like in the beginning. Well, after the introduction that is written by me, but then there's mainly Debussy in the beginning. But already in the beginning, very often, sometimes it's like a few bars going to Van Parys and then back to Debussy. And this, intercuts become larger and larger. But even in the end, even the last act, there is still Debussy. So there's always some snippets of Debussy, and then back to Van Parys. So it's very hard to define.
Benjamin, you missed a part at the beginning where Annelies explained that she didn't just take 20 minutes of Debussy and then continue and as Annelies, but there was rather this kind of vivisection of the score, so that the Debussy that's there is really spread out over the entire evening, which is quite brilliantly and sensitively done, I must, if I'm allowed to say that.
Thank you.
You must feel very comfortable with his harmonic language then.
Yeah. I think since I discovered him, I think I was 17 years old when I discovered his Etude for piano, and I immediately was fond of them. And since then, I played a lot of Debussy's when I still played piano, and and I arranged, of course, his Pelléas et Mélisande, which made me dive in his musical world. So yeah, it's still one of my big examples as a composer. I simply love his sound world.
Why?
I like his textures, his colors, his sensitivity, and also his humor. Because very often people tend to think that Pelléas et Mélisande is only very serious, symbolic opera, but there's so much humor in it, in the music. So he gives some very ironic comments on what's said in the text. So, and that's something that is underneath, and almost never this is taken. This is realized by the people who stage this opera. So there's lots of humor there, and also in other works. But we know from his letters that he had a lot of humor. But it's also in his music, and maybe that's also something that resonates, because I also like to. There's always somewhere a little joke in the music.
This is very good, since your next work is going to be a large-scale comedy.
Yeah, then it will be only serious references.
Good.
Okay,
good.
Well, thank you very much. I hope everyone will join for the live stream either on the 27th of February at 8 o'clock or within the 2-week time following that, where it will still be available online for only $10 for the possibility to be part of this historic moment. Schrödinger's opera, the chamber work that isn't alive and not alive simultaneously. Thank you so much to both of you. Thank you to our silent but vocal listenership out there, and to all those who will listen later, and look forward to being virtually together as best as we can for this occasion.
Thank you, Shirley, for hosting us tonight. It was great to see you again, but it would be much nicer to see you again in the opera. So I hope that someone we can meet in an opera hall again. And in the meantime, I would say all the best. And let's see each other virtually in the Usher Hall.
Yes, I look forward to the time when we actually chink glasses for an actual live performance.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay. And the answer to Lada, yes, there is a recording of tonight, and that will be Opera Vlaanderen will put it on their site as soon as the opera will start to play. So I think by the end of, or by the middle of February, it will be on the Opera Vlaanderen site.
Yeah, and
last answer of the evening.
Absolutely worth catching up alone for Gaea's stupendous answer to the question about why we need opera. Anyone who missed that, go back and watch it, because we all need to do that. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.